On behalf of the Jasper Chamber, I'd like to welcome everyone for coming today. Kind of something different. We decided to do a pre-legislative session update so you know what's going on and you can talk to our legislators maybe about some other things that you might be interested in. So I want to thank our 4 legislators that represent Du Bois County. We're very fortunate that we actually have 4 that touch all corners of our county, 2 representatives and 2 state senators. So I will go ahead and let them each, the way we normally do this, each one of them talks for about 5 or so minutes and tells about some issues, maybe some bills that they're looking at sponsoring, and then we can open it up for questions and answers. So is that all right with everybody? All right, I'm going to give you this. I don't know. Stephanie, is there a way to turn this down? It seems like it's really loud. Okay, Steve, would you like to start?
I will. Well, whoa. Okay, here we go. We get the right distance here. Okay. Well, a couple things that have come out. My new committee assignments, which are going to be a little different this year, next couple years, is I was named Vice Chair of Ag and Rural Development, so I'm pretty excited about that, especially with my background in supporting. Okay, now closer. Okay. Tess, keep. Okay. The Courts and Criminal Code, which is a new committee for me, and then I'm still on Veterans Affairs and Public Safety. So, okay. A couple things. Which has been kind of publicized is my volunteer safety bill, which is really to incentivize public safety for volunteer fire departments and firemen and women and reserve police officers. And so what I'm hoping to do is, I'm getting a lot of push forward on this, is a tax incentive based on some criteria. And also that if they are receiving some pay, like a per run pay of $10 is like a typical thing, or they get a $200 clothing allowance, that would now become tax exempt. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but about 74% of our fire protection in the state of Indiana comes from volunteers. What we're seeing is back in the day when my grandfather was a volunteer fireman, you used to go with your grandfather and your dad, and back then, there wasn't so much, the drinking age was lower, so you could have a beer and you could clean the fire truck, and it was a social event. And now you're seeing millennials are just not as interested in volunteering, so we're seeing a decline. The population of our volunteer firemen are getting older and women, and so there's no incentive. And so we're trying to figure out a way to incentivize before this local units of government may have to go to some kind of fire districts, which would raise taxes. The other thing that I've been promoting since I was on the county council is the payment in lieu of taxes. I know Senator Houchin has been pushing this for quite some time also, and that is these communities and counties that have large tracts of state property to get some money from the state to help offset those no taxes that are collected from there. The change in the bill this year that I put in there is up until this point, we'd always said this money would go to the general fund of a county. I changed this in looking at it has to be spent on capital expenditures for public safety, i.e. Police cars, fire department, fire engines, ambulances, those things that serve that area to help offset the cost for the local units of government. I got a couple other bills. One's helping North Spencer School that has been 2 years a problem, so I'm trying to get that pushed through this year. And then there's a couple other little things that's it just kind of helps the community. So that's kind of it in a nutshell for this year.
Hey, thank you all for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all this morning. So my name is Shane Lindauer. I'm State Rep for District 63, which is northern Du Bois County. My second session, along with Representative Bartels here. And my committees this year, I was on roads and transportation last year. I'm on that again. Natural resources, I'm on that again. This year, I'm Vice Chair of Public Health and Family and Children's Services. So I'm on 4 committees going forward here. So it'll be a busy session, I think, for me. I think all those committees are fairly active from what I understand. So looking forward to that. Some of the bills I'm working on, there was a bill that I introduced last year. It was increasing the tax deduction, the income tax deduction for veterans. Didn't get any traction last year. It was a non-budget year. So I'm bringing it forward again this year. Actually, Representative Bartels is a co-author on that as well. And what we're doing a little different this year is we're trying to bring that in incrementally. It's a pretty large fiscal impact on that if it goes forward. And so we're trying to maybe lessen that initial fiscal impact by bringing in incrementally, if I'm saying that right. So that's the big bill that I'm kind of working on this session. There are a handful of others, a couple small ones I've mentioned several times in conversations I've had with people. A lot of what we do, a lot of what I've seen happen is it's not real exciting, it's not real glamorous, it's not, unless it's kind of your issue. It's minor tweaks, minor changes in Indiana code. So there, for instance, there's an assessor's issue that was brought to me by our Pike County assessor, where it was basically, again, none of us would ever even know it was there, but unless you're in the assessor's world, where oil and gas producers were not penalized for late filing of their paperwork, for instance, and the assessor's report was 99% of oil and gas producers file their stuff on time when they're supposed to. But they're kind of the usual suspects that don't do that. And what it does is it's a waste of taxpayer money in my book, because the assessor's having to chase them down, so there's really no teeth, no penalty. And it also puts the assessors behind in filing their paperwork, which gets them in trouble with the state. So it's just a little tweak to Indiana code that can kind of fix that and add a penalty for that. So again, just kind of giving that teeth for the assessors to go after that a little more aggressively. There's a Bobcat bill that I'm filing. So if you followed this at all last year, the Natural Resources Commission was looking at implementing a bobcat hunting season. It got scrapped. So I heard from a lot of local hunters, conservationists in our area, the need for this, not because, and I've sat with several groups now, not because anybody is anti-bobcat. Nobody is out to eliminate the bobcat population or anything like that. It's really a concern for just wildlife management, game management, and what the bobcat population is doing to small game, rabbits and quail and things like that. So we're looking at, and we're still working out the details on that, how that might look, if it's going to be just certain counties, because it does seem to be much more of a problem in southern Indiana. When you get up to central and northern Indiana, you may not see a bobcat up there at all. So that's another thing that I'm working on. And then there's a few others. I'd be happy to discuss those with you as we go, but I want to leave time for you all to have questions and answers as well. So thank you.
All right, I'm Mark Messmer, and I'm a majority leader in the Senate this year, which is going to take a little bit of time away from carrying as many bills necessarily and be more of a gatekeeper within our side of the building. I'll be chairing the Environmental Affairs Committee. I'll be still a member of Public Policy, and I'm on Tax and Fiscal Committee. And I'm also chair of the Joint Rules Committee and vice chair of Rules Committee. So got a lot of hats to wear this year. I think from a overall perspective, this is a budget year upcoming this year, and obviously an issue that's been a big focus of ours throughout the interim is how can what can we do to make sure we increase school funding and do what we can to increase teacher pay. Department of Child Services has a big cost overrun problem from the last couple years. We're going to have to deal with with that and the challenges that it was bringing to our upcoming budget. We did get some updated revenue forecast numbers yesterday that are, and I suspected that our revenue forecast projections would be up compared to last December, with the GDP numbers going from 3.5% to 4% per quarter, up from 1.8% to 2% per quarter. Last year's fiscal numbers did not have any extra GDP numbers factored into it, and not that it'll still be a challenging budget session, but prior to our revised budget numbers, we were looking at pretty much a flat income projections last year at this point, and with the updated numbers, we're looking at a $500 million to $1 billion additional revenue dollars coming in over the biennium. So still going to really will make the decisions on DCS funding, on school funding, and those are probably the two biggest single items in the budget. Everything else kind of falls well under that as a whole. Medicaid as a whole is a big chunk of it, but the majority of that comes from the from the feds. We add a little bit of that on the state side, but much more I guess positive outlook going in after yesterday's numbers came out. Another item that's on the governor's agenda list, and I think if it's done, and our current plan the last couple of years on the Senate side was a bias crime bill that's done as an aggravator to an existing felony. So it would not be a standalone bias crime, where you could be potentially commit a crime for a minister speaking biblical principles at the pulpit. It can't happen as an aggravator to a battery or a murder or some other criminal offense where a judge can elevate your penalty based on bias indicators. Currently, they can do that based on some Supreme Court ruling interpretation from several years back. So this wouldn't be changing what a judge can already do. It would be codifying what a judge can do. I think the House and Senate leadership has been looking for the right way to get that done. Understand there's some ideas. A couple of different House members have filed. We've got a couple of Senate members working on it. But I think as an aggravator, done in the right method, which I think will eventually get. We're one of only 5 states that does not have a bias crime or hate crime bill, as they call it. And when you're one of the 5 that doesn't have it, and companies across the state that are multi-state, multinational companies, when you're on the bad boy list, then and when companies are looking, where are we going to spend that next billion or $2 billion or $10 billion investment? It's one of the metrics items that they check, and when your box doesn't get checked, you just don't get the opportunity to be part of that business investment from, like I said, not only just nationwide companies but international companies. We're competing against sites not only in Indiana, we're competing against sites in Texas and California and North Carolina and New York and Europe and everywhere else, Asia, everywhere across the world. So we'll see where that one ends up. I think done in the right form, it could probably get accomplished. With the Supreme Court ruling back in May, they ruled that the federal law that prohibited sports betting, anywhere but the states that had adopted it, decades ago, the Supreme Court struck that down, and so I think 8 states currently have adopted sports betting rules across the country this year already, and probably about 20 more are considering bills this coming session. It would be a item that would be added to what casinos can already to the casino portfolio. You'd have to register at the casino. You'd have to then within that with your most of that would be done through mobile apps. But there's technology that allows us to do what they call geofencing that can make sure the bet was placed only within Indiana. It would require the bets be based on league data. So there's only one source of data for the NFL sports that are participating or that allow the bets to be had. It would require daily reporting of those bets and then outside analysis to make to watch for people that are cheating, people that are obviously if you see an abnormal chunk of bets on one particular game or activity within the game, there's ways to monitor that. And the NCAA has worked with the legislatures in other states and have approved they're no longer opposing it. That they just want it to be done with significant rules in place. Another issue that we see continuing to enhance is workforce development efforts that we started last year. We got a report back from the the governor's cabinet level position on workforce development, and we'll continue to work at how to maximize our career and technical education efforts. An opportunity that Vincennes University has taken upon themselves to be more effective, more cost effective, and working on internship programs. Just over the summer, the VU's staff worked with an industrial manufacturer in Muncie to put career tech education training and robotics training, in one of the factories in a high tech manufacturer up in that part of the state, at no cost to the VU, no cost to the state. They're going to bear the cost of the training facility, all of the classroom space that they need in that manufacturer's facility. VU is going to provide the staff and the curriculum, and do like they're doing here with with their industrial maintenance program, but doing programs like that on site across the state. I mean, what a phenomenal way to implement that and get that done in a more collaborative effort with industry. So hats off to VU for thinking outside the box. Some other issues we'll probably work on. I'm gonna be working on a defense industry update. We started. I chaired what we called the Crane Caucus since I came in 2008. We're going to open that up more and look at the Indiana defense space as a whole, and see what we can do to make Indiana as effective and competitive on getting future additional defense appropriations. We've got what we call a base planning commission, and you might be on it, Shane. They formed it in 2005, and they've never met. Now that's a good committee, but it's got way too many members. It's got, I mean, every state rep, every county that has a defense asset across the state. I mean, they have so many people, assigned to it. I mean, if they ever actually met, it'd probably be about 100 people, and good luck getting anything done on a committee of 100. So I've been working with the Office of Defense Development, Danielle Chrysler, over the summer, and looking at how we can streamline and make our, change that, restructure that committee to be what we're going to call the Indiana Defense Task Force, and make it more proactive rather than reactive to a potential upcoming BRAC. I mean, I think Crane has done a phenomenal job at positioning themselves to not be looking at the place that they're going to close. We want to look at how do we flip this and make Indiana more proactive at how do we bring more assets to the state. And then part of that, it was in the governor's agenda this year, and I filed the bill many times and can never get it moving. Maybe this year, since the governor likes it, it will. And to exempt active military pay from taxation, and there is going to be a fiscal to that, but the taxation of military benefits. All the states that are big players in the defense world, Florida, Texas, the areas that are the dominant players in the defense business, they do not tax military pay, and we do. And it's just kind of like the bias crime thing earlier. When people are looking at where to locate their defense asset, and they look at most of the employees for a lot of these defense jobs come from military retirees, and it's one of the boxes. If you can't check it, you're just not even considered. So that'll be an area we'll look at trying to get some movement on this year finally, and also within that military realm, we have international countries that bring their people to Indiana, bring them to Crane, bring them to Atterbury, bring them to Muscatatuck to train, to do high-tech training for folks that we have good relationships with. And when those folks are there, they'd like to have them be eligible for in-state college tuition. So while we have those international partnerships and bringing those people into Indiana to train, allow them to when they've got coursework and things they want to do, to allow them to get in-state tuition. Part of the sports betting, we're going to try to there's a couple of casino licenses in Lake County. One they want to move to the interstate area, and one they want to transfer somewhere else in the state, and trying to just take an overall look at the gaming statutes in our state and do a reset after 25 years of river boats and Lake Michigan boats. A couple of years ago, we allowed the river boats to move, from the river boat onto land, and really just a time to do a comprehensive look at the casino and gaming legislation. Last year I got a chiropractic bill update, after 30 years of no updates to their code. And since I was able to get that done, now the physical therapists are coming back and say, can you help us next? So be working with a physical therapist and trying to get them at this time of the year, trying to get them to sit down with the chiropractors and the occupational therapists and the medical doctors and the ODs and everybody involved, and trying to get more of that done, before session starts this year, so it's not quite the lift when we're in Annapolis. An issue to help get rural broadband deployed, more cost effectively, and we've been battling NDOT now for 3 years, Aaron? I've got a bill that classifies broadband as utility for everything. I mean, we're not regulated on the rate of what the broadband companies and telecoms can charge, but in every other way they are regulated. And U.S. Department of Transportation says, if they're an unregulated utility, you can charge them right-of-way access. Well, our telecoms are kind of a hybrid, but we spent a little time during the off session to hone in the definitions to make sure, because NDOT can't charge right-of-way access to gas companies, to telephone companies, to, what else? Any utility company. But since broadband, telecom, internet, cable are all kind of, most of the companies that do one do all. And just because I'm deploying, and if they deployed that product to your home in copper, then they can't charge them right-of-way access. But currently, if they deploy that product to your home in fiber, NDOT's saying we can charge them right-of-way access. And if we're adding tens of thousands to millions of dollars of cost to get rural broadband deployed because NDOT is charging right-of-way access, who ultimately pays that bill? The people you're trying to get service to, and it's stupid. So, going to try to fix that. I thought I had a fix to that in 2013, when we just added broadband to a bunch of our utility definition sections, but obviously NDOT doesn't think that was good enough. So we'll try again. And then also NDOT, last year, Senator Houchin worked excruciatingly hard to get a broadband grant program put together that all of the telecoms, all of the cable companies, everybody agreed to, and it was a pretty significant, pretty detailed way to make sure when we're doing grants on broadband that we don't just build and duplicate service in areas that already have it. Now NDOT decided they want to spend money on rural broadband. The governor's announced he wants to spend $100 million on rural broadband, but he wants to do it through NDOT because he thinks our bill that we passed last year is too limiting on what they want to do. So I've got a bill that's taken our bill from last year, House Bill 1065, and where we had Okra being the grant administrator and they follow all these rules, we're adding NDOT to the list. So they're going to follow the same program we put together. Oh, good. All right, so I'll turn that over to Senator Houchin next.
I got to tell you, I could not be happier to have a partner like Mark Messmer in this broadband fight. He and I have been working alongside each other as members of the Utilities Committee, trying to get broadband access to our district, Senate District 47, and Senator Messmer's district. We're among some of the most unserved areas of the state in terms of broadband deployment. And so since I got to the General Assembly, I've been trying to work on every session something that moves the ball down the field to get access to broadband infrastructure. So last session, I passed, it ended up being House Bill 1065, which laid out some guidelines for grant monies that the state would distribute, to distribute those in a certain way so that we make sure that we're not overbuilding in areas that already have access, and we get this needed resources in the areas that first don't have access and then have speeds less than 10.1 and then moving up to there. So we want to get everybody to a minimum level of access and then from that point increase speeds across the state. As Senator Messmer mentioned, the governor announced he's spending $100 million on broadband infrastructure. That sounds great, but they're not following any of the guidelines that were agreed to in House Bill 1065. So I'm glad to hear that you're replacing Okra with NDOT. My bill says any money, any money that is. Oh, that's good. Mine just says that any money that the state might spend on broadband infrastructure, no matter the agency that's spending it, has to follow the guidelines established in 1065. So the same concept, just broadening that so that no matter, they can't, after we do NDOT, then they might say, yeah, that's right, I should, yeah, grandfather that right back. But again, I cannot say enough about Mark's efforts on this front and being a very, very strong partner to push back on some of the things that we think are not the right strategies. We all want money to go to broadband infrastructure. It's a great thing that the governor wants to spend, $100 million to do that. But as representatives of this area and areas of the state that are tremendously unserved, we want to make sure that any dollars that are spent toward broadband infrastructure go first to where they're needed most. And I don't think that under the current structure of where they want and how they want to spend those resources, that it's going to be following that path. And so if we have to take some legislative action to make sure that those monies go where they're needed, then that's what we both plan to do. So that's great. I'm Senator Erin Houchin. I represent Senate District 47. That is the eastern half of Du Bois County, all of Orange, Washington, Harrison, Crawford, and Perry County. And I've been serving since 2014. I just got reelected in the last election. I serve as the ranking member of the Tax and Fiscal Policy Committee. I'm on the Utilities Committee, Commerce and Technology, Elections, and Family and Children's Services. Prior to my public service, I worked for the Indiana Department of Child Services as a family case manager. I've worked for the Community Alliance Promoting Education, for New Hope Services, where I was a family preservation worker going into homes and working with families that were involved with the Department of Child Services. After that, I served as the Southeast Indiana Regional Director for U.S. Senator Dan Coates before getting elected in 2014 to serve in the state Senate. I'm from Salem, Washington County. And I live there with my husband, who's also an elected official. He's our elected county prosecutor, and our 3 kids, who are 15, 13, and 9. I have a number of bills this upcoming session that I wanted to touch on. The first is on the opioid epidemic. You've probably heard of methadone clinics. They are statutorily limited in Indiana, so we can only have a certain number of methadone clinics in Indiana, and methadone is a pure opioid replacement. I think there are 26 methadone clinics in the state of Indiana, and again, we cannot add any more of those without legislation that says we can add more methadone clinics. We also have a new hybrid called Suboxone clinics, and Suboxone clinics are largely unregulated in the state of Indiana. At last count, there were over 500 Suboxone clinics that have popped up around Indiana. They are a hybrid between a pure opioid replacement and an opioid agonist. And so last session, I filed legislation to put modest regulations on Suboxone clinics. They're called office-based opioid treatment centers, or OBOTs. And I filed a bill that would have placed modest regulations on those, similar to those that are on methadone clinics. Things such as requiring that they are offering group therapy as part of their treatment. So it's not just here's a replacement for an opioid. Because what we know about these forms of treatment is, while some people may need to be on them long term, the idea is to wean people off of this drug. And in 2014, the state of Indiana, because we use Medicaid dollars to pay for this product, Suboxone, in 2014, Indiana spent about $7.5 million on Suboxone. alone, not including Vivitrol, which is only the agonist, the opioid agonist, which means if you take Vivitrol, it's a 30-day, you can't get high from Vivitrol. So on Suboxone alone, in 2014, Indiana spent $7.5 million. By the time last year came around, during the last legislative session, Indiana was spending $22.5 million annually on the Suboxone treatment alone, not including methadone and not including Vivitrol. And at that time, what I wanted to do was to make sure that if tax dollars are going toward this product, that we could, as a state, ensure the public that the treatment that is out there is quality and is following a certain set of guidelines, because there are treatment providers that do a good job and there are treatment providers that may not be doing a great job. And we don't want to have $22.5 million going out for a product and a service that we can't guarantee or ensure quality. So I worked with stakeholders throughout the summer. That bill did not pass last session. It was sent to Summer Study Committee. I worked with the stakeholders throughout the interim, and we now have a draft that we believe everyone will agree to, which is, you never know going into session what's going to happen. But that is also part of the governor's legislative agenda, is to place these modest regulations on these clinics so that we can ensure quality treatment and that tax dollars are going toward quality treatment and not just across the board monies going toward treatment that we can't ensure is actually effective. So that is the OBOT bill. I have a couple of pieces of legislation on the issue of education. We passed the diploma pathways. I think that was last session, pathways. And we created an alternative diploma for those students who may be special education. We capped that at 1%, so only 1% of the population in your school corporation can qualify for the alternative diploma. In my school, my high school, or in Washington County, they have a very high percentage of special education students. So the state average is about 15% of your overall population is special education or on an IEP. At Salem High School, it's about 26.7% on an IEP. So what they were finding is that they have really actually more than 1% of students that could, now some of those students are going to be on the regular diploma track, not the alternative diploma track. But what they found was that they have more than 1% that could actually qualify or should be qualifying for the alternative diploma, and they can't access that because of the 1% cap. So I'm working on legislation to create a waiver so a school that has more students outside the 1% can access the alternative diploma with permission from the department. And that's on a student-by-student basis. They would ask for a waiver so that this additional student can be considered for the alternative diploma. The other thing that I see happening, I think because of the federal Every Student Succeeds Act, is there's still a certificate of completion, and I see Tammy's here, so I want to talk to you after this. But there's still a certificate of completion that's different from a diploma. It basically means that you showed up and you didn't meet the requirements to graduate, but you showed up and for school and went through the motions, and you get a certificate of completion. I have heard of school corporations that are meeting with students when they're in the 8th grade transitioning to high school, where they're putting kids right on a certificate program, which is supposed to be a last resort when you don't meet, when you know you're not going to meet the requirements, you're not able to do it. Probably your junior, senior year is when the certificate of completion conversation should happen. But it's happening in some school corporations at the 8th grade level, where students are put directly onto a certificate track and not even given the option or the opportunity to try to meet those credits for the alternative diploma or other diploma tracks. We have a technical diploma now, we have a technical honors diploma, we have the honors diploma, we have the general diploma, we have the alternative diploma. This was all part of career pathways. So I want to make sure that parents, when they have their special education planning meeting for high school, they're given all of the options. I want to make sure that's happening. And I want to make sure that the certificate of completion is not a first resort, but a last resort, only when we know students are not able to meet the requirements to graduate. And those are a couple of issues that have kind of popped up since the last legislative session, just in recent weeks. And so I have a couple of bill requests in on that. One other thing I did a few years ago was I limited the contract buyouts for school superintendents. You may remember the news of some superintendent contract buyouts were one was $900,000 or $800,000 buyouts. So those are dollars that go to leaving school superintendents rather than to schools and classrooms. And so I did a bill that limited superintendent contract buyouts to 1 year's salary, not including fringe benefits, or $250,000, whichever's less, because I found in the discussions that some superintendents were actually making in excess of $250,000. So their contract buyout would be could be $300,000. So we capped it at $250,000 or 1 year's salary, the lesser amount. We did that for school superintendents. We neglected to do that for assistant superintendents. And so there was an assistant superintendent issue that got brought to my attention after that in terms of a contract buyout. So I have a bill to kind of rectify that and make that on parity with the school superintendent. So it will be a similar bill, only applying to assistant superintendents this time around. Let's see, the broadband issue I've discussed. I will be working on the Department of Child Services. As I mentioned in my introduction, I have an extensive background with the Department of Child Services. I've done adoptions, licensed foster parents, investigated child abuse, carried an ongoing caseload, worked as a service provider in the home. So I do have an extensive amount of experience and knowledge on this topic, and I want to try to help fix the problems that are plaguing the Department of Child Services right now. One of the things that I see, I pulled numbers for the department, as Senator Messmer mentioned, the budget is for Department of Child Services has really exploded, I believe in part because of the opioid epidemic. I also think that, and my colleagues may disagree with me on this front, but when we did criminal code reform, this was before I got there in 2014, penalties were reduced for a lot of drug crimes. And so folks who used to be in jail for 18 months for a drug crime are now in jail for 30, 60, 90 days, 6 months. And they're kept not at DOC but at the local jail. And so that leads to this kind of revolving door where they're not, and I hate to use the word kept, but they're not in the system long enough to really rehabilitate people and really get them help. So I think those two things, the opioid epidemic and criminal code reform, were sort of the perfect storm for this, all of these kids that we now have in custody and in care. Part of that, though, is that in Indiana and federally, if a child is out of the home 15 out of 22 months, and the parents are not participating in that case, then a termination of parental rights can be filed, and those kids can be put up, they can be adopted by their foster parents or another adoptive home. When I last checked numbers for Indiana, because we have a high number of kids in foster care compared to other Midwestern states. I think at the last count it was 25,000 kids in foster care in Indiana. Our counterparts are more like 15,000, 16,000, which is a lot. And all states are suffering with the opioid epidemic. But the number of kids who are eligible for adoption or termination were about 5,000 to 6,000. So we have kids who have been in care. Some have been in foster care for 3 years or more, waiting to be given their permanent homes and permanent families. And because the legal system is backed up, because attorneys are not filing the paperwork necessary, those kids are just in limbo. So if we improve how we deal with those cases, we could give these kids permanent families and not let them be continuing in limbo. The state then would not be continuing to pay foster care placement fees, et cetera. So I'm going to be looking at ways to streamline that, improve the attorney system. Some counties have half-time attorneys that are employees of the Department of Child Services. We used to have a model where the attorneys were local law firms that we contracted with. I think that was a much better system. Then there was always an attorney available, or 2 or 3 attorneys available to help cover Department of Child Services cases. Right now, if there's 1 or a half-time attorney, those cases are not getting the attention that they need and deserve to move those kids either to permanency or back home, whatever is in their best interest. So we'll be looking at ways to improve that system, in addition to improving training. A couple of things that we hear, that I hear about DCS, is that there is a strained relationship between the department and foster parents. So we want to do what we can to improve those relationships and make sure that our foster parents feel valued, that they are an integral part of the team to take care of the needs of these children, whether they go into permanency in an adoptive home or they go back home. And so making sure that they're valued and part of the discussion is important. And then we can, when possible, utilize foster parents as mentors to these families that need some mentorship and support. And so there are cases where the foster parent has a really great relationship with the biological parents, and that ends up being a long-term relationship. The kids go back home and they still have that support system, and so I'd like to see us utilizing that more as well. And then several states are doing a thing called finding family at first contact. And so when a child is taken into custody, some states require a great effort to find a family member when they first get custody of that child. And you can imagine, I mean, if you're a caseworker, you may have a child that you have had to take custody of in the middle of the night, and you have the child back at the office. You're making phone calls trying to find a placement for the child, and a lot of times that is calling through your list of foster families or placing agencies, trying to find a home. I would like to see us have a resource available to caseworkers so that they can focus on taking care of the kids while others are looking for a family member, a suitable family member to make that placement. Because I would much rather have a child picked up by a known family member when they're in that circumstance than a foster family that might be a stranger to them when that's possible. So we have a child welfare hotline where if you call the 1-800 number, you can make a child welfare report. I would like a hotline available for family case managers to have assistance available to find those family members and help and assist those caseworkers with making placements that make the most sense for kids in these circumstances. So I'll also be working on that. You may have heard of I'm sure you heard of the Noblesville shooting, the school shooting. After that occurred, we discovered that there is no waiver to adult court for attempted murder. So the perpetrator could have been waived to adult court had he succeeded in killing the victims, but because he didn't succeed, they could have been permanently injured, permanently disabled. They could have even been placed in vegetative states, but because there's no waiver to adult court for attempted murder, then that perpetrator goes through the juvenile justice system where they will be released at the age of 18. So I filed legislation. I actually heard from the grandmother of the victim who lives in my district, upset over this occurrence, and so I'll be filing a waiver to adult court for attempted murder. It's not automatic, but it does give judges the option, rather than making it exclusively unavailable, it does give judges the option to waive a juvenile to adult court for attempted murder when that's not available as an option today. State police, we did a pay raise for them in the last budget cycle, but we did not adjust that to inflation. And so I'll be filing a bill to adjust the state police pay raise to inflation. And then property tax deductions. The over 65 property tax deduction has not been updated since 2010. I had a constituent that their property value had increased them over the amount And it's been a significant increase in home values that have put some over the age of 65 outside of the window of the over 65 property tax deduction. So I have adjusted that to inflation, and we'll hope to raise that cap to make sure that we're taking care of our seniors. So.
Looks like there's a lot of things going on, a lot of concerns all the way for our children, all the way to senior citizens and everywhere in between. I failed earlier, though, to mention our partner here today, Vincennes University Jasper campus. We have our dean, Christian Bloom, here, and our assistant, Stephanie Crockett. So we want to thank both of them for their participation in this event today. Now we will open this up for questions from the audience. So the way we normally do this is we try not to make too many questions about the same topic, so we sometimes we'll pass it around, but we do ask you speak your question into the microphone.
Hello, my name is Teresa Kendall, and I've recently moved to Du Bois County. Was always a resident of northern Indiana around Indianapolis, and I just recently retired as a teacher. What I'd like to know is, are you going to address, actually going to address teacher salary issues in this legislative session? Just want to make a brief comment that teachers have not had significant raises in years. Teachers have to buy their own supplies. I don't know of any teacher who's going to come out of Vincennes or Indiana State or Southern Indiana, any college around here that is not going to have thousands of dollars out of pocket to start their classroom. Teachers desperately need a raise. I can never think of a time when I did not work a second job as a teacher. I have my entire adult life because you cannot live on a teacher's salary. Teachers coming out of these colleges now have $500, $600, $700 a month student loan payments. And it's tough for them to make it on a teacher's salary, pay the student loan payments, and have to buy all the supplies that they have to use in their classroom. This is something that goes on all the time. If you take aside, what the adults have to endure as an employee of a school system, you also have the issue of students being in classrooms there are 50 and 60 kids in a classroom. Now, that may not be happening in Du Bois County, but when the state took on the responsibility of funding the entire school system, we all took on the responsibility of funding the schools in Indianapolis and in Fort Wayne. And in Indianapolis, there are kids that are in classes. There are 60 kids in a classroom. And if it's happening there, it's going to happen here. So what I'd like to know is, what are you going to do about teachers' salaries so that we can keep our teachers, keep our young people here teaching, and make sure that the teachers are in the system now can live and survive on what they make?
All right, anyone like to comment on that?
I can speak for what our leadership has talked about, at least on the House side. I know Speaker Bosma has made it a point during organization. Can everybody hear me okay?
Or you can use their microphone.
Speaker Bosma on Organization Day made it a point that it's something, I can't sit here and tell you absolutely 100% I'm not going to do that. But Speaker Bosma did, make it a point that was part of something that we were going to take a real hard look at and hopefully get something done on. So obviously, when you talk about DCS and what they're going to be looking at from a number standpoint, and some of the other, Medicaid expenses and things like that, there's only so much money to go around. But I know that it's something that we'll be taking a hard look at. So
I would agree. I think House and Senate leadership and the governor, I think there's been ongoing discussions throughout the interim on how to address getting teacher pay increases taken care of. We've had some bills over the past couple of budget cycles where we've had some pay incentives that had to go to teacher pay that we had built into the budget. I think I had my fiscal staff run the numbers on Jasper's school pay. I haven't run it from all of our corporations, but from over the last 5 years, I think, you guys have had, I think the average was about 5,000 per teacher probably from 2012 to 2017 that most teachers got increases. That may not be comparable to other corporations, but they've done a pretty good job. But we've got to look at what the state does not want to take over mandating contracts. Everybody wants local control. We're funding extra money. The lion's share, the majority of the budget goes to school funding. We'll continue to get significant increases where we can to the administrative part of the funding to schools. We do give school corporations the flexibility, which Northeast Du Bois took a couple of years ago on a referendum to get extra money in. But here again, that's putting that option down at the local control level, and I think those are very important options that we need to leave at the disposal for schools. We're looking at ways to make some local option income tax and some other tax mechanisms to go to school safety improvements. I think Senator Holman's got a bill he's working on with that, and we're trying to look at ways to get money to schools in the most effective way we can. And I think in the past couple budget cycles, we've probably put an extra $1 billion into K-12 education. So it's not that there hasn't been significant dollars put to it, but the challenge in most of the school corporations that struggle, it's rural schools with declining enrollment. And even if you give them X amount more dollars per kid, it's just a tough squeeze that they deal with every day. Schools that have growing enrollment, it's usually not much of a problem. But the rural areas that have declining enrollment, it is a tough battle. We're trying to give as much flexibility, and we'll look for ways to incentivize that pay. Can't tell you what the final product will be, but it will be done. It'll be looked at.
I know we're going to look at this year. We did increase funding for education in the last budget cycle. I have seen a disparity between older teachers nearing retirement and their income and newer teachers who are at the lowest end of the pay scale who haven't been able to get raises. Part of that, I believe, is because if you're giving a percentage across the board raise, then the higher salaried teachers at the top end are going to get more of that income or that raise than the percentage of $35,000. It does. A 2% raise for an $80,000 employee is more than a 2% raise for a $30,000 employee. That's just math. But we fund schools. They decide how to pay them. We pay per student, and Mark's right that if there's a school with declining enrollment, because we pay per student, then they if there's declining enrollment, they might see less in their budget. But in my local school corporation, we gave $1 million more over the biennium to the local school corporation. And when salaries were announced, the superintendent got a $6,000 raise, every administrator got a $4,000 raise annually, and the teachers got $200 raises. Now that is not the General Assembly deciding that teachers shouldn't get raises. That is the General Assembly saying, here's $1 million more to give your teachers raises, and they put it toward the administrators and not toward their teachers. So yes, we want teachers to be paid more. I would like to see us have an ability to give the newer teachers higher salaries quicker so that they can pay off their student loans. The state police are on a matrix where if they have 5 years of longevity, they get a bump. If they have another 5 years of longevity, they have a bump. And we want performance factored into that too. But until we change the way that we look at how we increase teacher salaries, we're still going to have this discrepancy between those at the top of the pay scale and those newer teachers at the bottom of the pay scale. If they give $200 raises across the board, then that's the same for the teacher nearing retirement or the one that's brand new. But there are teachers in my local school corporation who got a $200 raise who've been there for 5-6 years without seeing a raise at all. They got stipends, they got bonuses, but they didn't get raises to go toward their teacher retirement. So I'm probably in the minority of wanting it to look like more like a matrix where you get some longevity and you. Well, I wasn't there during that time, so I can't speak to that. But what I can tell you is that if it looked more like that, then you could give the newer teachers, the younger teachers, a bump to get them where they need to be. And then at some point, the teachers nearing retirement would have to level off so that you can get to the increases that are necessary for those newer teachers. But I don't know what it's going to look like in this next legislative session, but I am concerned, particularly about newer, younger teachers that don't have the ability to get raises as necessary to pay off student loans and meet their obligations. What I can tell you, though, is that in my experience, when we funded the schools, we gave them more money, they decided what to do with it, and they negotiated for the money to go mostly to administrators and not a lot to teachers. I'm not okay with that. Local teachers shouldn't be okay with that either. But we hear this about, well, when are we going to address teacher salaries? We are. And I want to look at that, but my concern is more about these newer teachers who have had, for the last several years, an inability to get up to the income level that they should rightfully be at.
All right, other questions? Oh, you can comment on that.
So there's been a couple people. I had my first educational summit, which no matter what, I hope that if after I'm no longer elected official in this position, that continues. Learned a lot about school corporations in my district specifically, and I've studied every teacher's pay. I got a list of every teacher by name and what they make, bus drivers, administrators, support staff. I've looked at all the contracts. And a couple things it's interesting to find out when you have all those people in a room and you get some ground truth of what happens in the weeds, so to speak. So I see concern. I know the governor has mentioned teachers' increase and putting money towards that. And you think, well, that's great. And then you realize when you talk to school corporations, they go, well, we're hesitant about putting it on base pay because if it's not there in the future, how do they fund that? So that's why you see those stipends. I learned that. It's like, oh, that makes sense. I would do the same thing in business, as in I would not necessarily increase some of my employees' pay, but I'd give them more Christmas bonuses or stipends. And it's the same, like it's an interesting principle. So be very careful as we go through this. And obviously the funding formula for students is make sure that is exactly the same in Carmel, Indiana, as it down in Du Bois and Perry Central and Perry County. The rural school grants, they disappeared a few years ago prior to probably any of us being here. Why? Well, kind of get that, but can we bring that back? Is that something that makes sense based on some criteria that's not opened up for everybody, but should the school have a rating to qualify for this and those kind of things? So it's very, I'm very passionate about this and learning more. And I'm not going to go into it and just say yes, 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 but there are some things that we can do. And I completely agree. I don't believe and I do not want the state involved in local corporation decision-making, even when it comes to pay. I think we provide the funding and some guidance and then locally do that because I can see throughout my district completely different ideas on how the pay scale and how they do it and why they do it, and that makes sense and it works for them. So I don't want the state of Indiana coming in and telling corporations this is how you got to do things. So there's a good balance there, and so I'm definitely passionate about that and continue my education on learning about education.
All right, did you have a question?
Yes. I have a two-part question. My name's Mary Hess. I'm from Dale, Indiana, in Spencer County, and I represent the Southwestern Indiana Citizens for Quality of Life. And I would like an answer from each of you. And it's an easy question. Answer will be yes, no, or I'm undecided. Do you support, oppose, or have no position on the proposed refinery on the border of Du Bois and Spencer counties to convert coal to diesel fuel? And the second part of the question, do you support, oppose, or have no position on the use of taxpayer dollars to directly or indirectly support the construction or operation of the proposed refinery on the border of the Du Bois and Spencer counties to convert coal to diesel fuel?
The answer is I support it, and I support it because the local government units support it. So I back them. I don't make that decision for local units of government. They have voted to support that project, and I do. When it comes to your tax question, I think if you're asking, like, should the local units of government do tax abatements or some kind of TIF, I think that once they figure out what they want and what the citizens needs from those kinds of advantages, I support whatever they choose to do.
Yeah, I guess on your second question, I would like clarification. What do you mean by taxpayer funding? Or could restate the question, if you would, please, the second part.
Would you agree to taxpayer funding of the project indirectly or directly?
So what's your
Why,
definition?
if there's subsidies or indirectly, like any state organizations is funded by taxpayer money, getting involved with it?
So, I mean, subsidies are, quite different than abatement, I guess. So, well, not necessarily. I mean, so an abatement is different than a subsidy. I'm talking about, are you allowing a business to keep its own money through an abatement or something like that? That's actually allowing a business. It's not our money as the government. It's the business's money that the business pays the government. So that's quite different than once it's paid into the government and then the government subsidizes it out or doles it out. That's different than, hey, we're not going to take that from you in the first place because it's the business's money. So that's my perspective on it, and that's why I was asking for clarification. I'm sorry? So from the government back down, I don't generally support that, no. I'm not a fan of government picking winners and losers that way.
Do you support the project itself?
So to be fair, I haven't studied the project extensively. Actually, that's even an overstatement. I haven't really studied it at all. So from what I know of it, yes, I would support it.
Okay, you say you didn't study it at all, and then you said, from what I know of it, so what is it you know of it?
So I know very little about it.
And you support it on knowing very little about it?
Right. So would you suggest that I oppose it and know very little about it?
One of the questions was I'm undecided.
Okay, from what I know right now, I would support it. Because it creates jobs. Back to Representative Bartel's issue, it's local units that support it, which are...
Very low unemployment rate, and the businesses, in fact, Drumwood has said they may be down if it comes because we don't have enough people to fill the jobs that are available now.
Okay, understood. Again, from what I knew of it...
31,000 jobs come to the state of Indiana, and this would be down to 125 if Drumwood leaves.
Okay. Thank you.
I would say I support the project based on the local, it's a local government decision, and for them, and the local government officials are the ones who have supported. I can't tell them what to do. As the General Assembly, we have no say in what the Indiana Department of Environmental Management does. They're following EPA guidelines. They're following federal rules. We could have IDEM issue the air permits, or we could have EPA issue the air permits, but they have to follow the same set of rules. We choose as Indiana to authorize an executive agency to issue the environmental permits, or we could stop funding them and we could let EPA issue those permits, but the rules are the same. So I mean, we can't tell IDEM what to do. We have no right to tell local officials what to do. If they've made the decisions to support it, then we'll support their efforts. And my issue on direct tax support, no local unit of government or no state incentive ever writes a check to any business for anything. The state has some tax incentive programs where they let them have, they give them the ability to negotiate the state income taxes and state taxes that they pay the state, but there's never a check for any amount of money written to a business, and we don't do that at the local level or the state level, and I don't think that's the right thing to do in any case either. A tax abatement is when they slowly phase in what the business is paying to the local unit in property taxes, but they're not writing them a check at any level, and that would be making tax payments directly to a business, and I don't think that's the right role of government either.
That is not my district, so I don't have enough information to have a position one way or the other on that issue.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Rob?
Thank you, Nancy. Congratulations to those of you who recently won the election, or re-election. My name is Rock Emmert. I'm from Ferdinand. I'm one of the founders of the Ferdinand Folk Festival with my wife Chris, and have been a co-coordinator of the festival throughout its 9-year existence. The family-friendly festival's themes are music, art, environment, and wellness. It brings in, according to tourism studies, roughly just under $1 million per year to the local economy. So music, art, environment, and wellness. I'm also chair of Project Acorn, which is a regional all-volunteer series of weekly concerts, wellness classes, nature workshops, field trips, hikes, and art workshops for all ages. And we just completed our 150th event on December 8th, and we're going to be announcing our winter lineup here in a few weeks. I'm also a member of the group that Mary referenced, Southwestern Indiana Citizens for Quality of Life, and we appreciate the opportunity to be here. Our group consists of 25 core committee members, medical doctors, scientists, farmers, community leaders, teachers, and parents. We currently have at least 2,000 known supporters with nearly as many petition signatures, mostly from the citizens of Dale and surrounding towns, especially those downwind of the proposed coal to diesel refinery, Ferdinand, Jasper, Huntingburg, Santa Claus. According to Riverview Energy's air permit referenced by you, Mr. Messmer, Senator Messmer, and thank you for addressing IDEM's role in this. According to Riverview Energy's air permit, soon to be approved by IDEM, we believe, and because we're Indiana, and Indiana IDEM approves everything, unfortunately, and chemical engineers and chemists on our committee, one of them who's here today, Randy Vall, the massive refinery, the first of its kind in the Western Hemisphere, for those of you who don't know that, and the footprint of the operation being 512 acres, which is over 4 times the size of Dale itself, and about twice the size of Ferdinand, just to give you some perspective from an aerial footprint standpoint, would emit a distinct sulfur or rotten egg odor in your constituency and beyond your constituency. Specifically, Ferdinand is downwind. We'd bear the brunt of it based on prevailing wind patterns. Huntingburg, Jasper, Santa Claus would also be directly in the prevailing wind patterns. Riverview Energy has not disputed this. IDEM has not disputed this. That would be a price we pay for progress. When I was in grad school in Terre Haute, it was known as the armpit of the nation because of its stench from a single nearby factory west of Terre Haute. I remember often feeling nauseated of those hot and humid summers at a campus. David Letterman and Steve Martin joked about Terre Haute, calling it the armpit of the nation. I have heard it said that this smell from the Riverview plant would be the smell of progress, and it's a price we pay. So with our many economic and family tourism amenities on the rise, places like Holiday World, a gem in our nation, the restored Astor Theater, another relatively small but gem in our area, Jasper Parklands, I was out there over the summer. Wow, what a cool direction for this region. And thank you to anybody here who's responsible for that. The Riverwalk, the Jasper Mill, and all the exciting new downtown developments here in Jasper. Huntingburg's amazing Stellar City project on Market Street. If you haven't been there, check it out. Lincoln Amphitheater, and what Mark Stezik and others have been able to do for that. For all of Riverview's potential benefits, do you approve of bringing in such a massive single operation that would literally leave a foul and toxic odor in Jasper, Huntingburg, and Ferdinand, and all the towns downwind? And I know that you're not directly responsible for bringing this here necessarily, but you are our representatives, and you are all we have. And if nothing else, to put pressure on IDEM to look into this. We had the executive director of the American Academy of Pediatrics come down and speak at the Dale hearing about the health issues related. And Senator Houchin, you talked about special ed rates. I've done extensive research on that, and I can't wait to talk to you about that, if not today, another time. We have special ed rates in this area over twice, and in some cases triple the national average. And much of that is because we are in the most toxic part of the United States because of our presence of coal-fired plants. And this would emit 2.2 million tons of CO2 when all the world's climatologists are saying that's just not smart. And as our 4 representatives here, you do have power. You're potentially all we have. So on the foul odor, I would like, I'm okay with that, or I'm not okay with that, or I'm undecided on that. So thank you for your time.
All right. No comments. So.
I basically made, I can't make it any more clear. The General Assembly has no oversight over none of the executive agencies. Do we have an oversight committee? Do we have any authority over any of the regulatory agencies that we set up in the state, not just IDEM, none of them.
All right.
Will it lobby the governor with a little pressure because we know he's behind this project? Any lobbying power on our behalf? I know you guys lobby the governor all the time and vice versa. I know what goes on. Would you be willing to go to bat for Jasper and your constituency on this issue? Already have. If the governor doesn't have to listen to us.
The governor doesn't have to listen to us on anything. The governor's agencies don't have to listen to us on, and they rarely do listen to us on anything. NDOT, DCS, FSSA, Medicaid, you name the agency, IDM, IURC, they don't have to listen to us on anything. We approve. Yeah. So.
Senator Houghton said about the NDOT issue, I was glad to hear that you guys do butt heads with state agencies. That's all we're asking for. Do any of you four have anything negative to say about what could radically be a game changer for this region for generations to come in health and tourism and economy? Any comments at all contrary to supporting this as our leaders?
We have no oversight on the project, on the plant, on local government, or on the governor. Anybody else?
I would just say that what I think you're asking us is, or out of all of us, is even though that whatever company follows the rules, if you don't like it, you want us to buck the system and say you don't qualify. I'm not willing to do that.
That's not what we said.
Perhaps it's a conversation for after.
Yeah. We are lobbyists, which is what we hire you to do, to lobby for our causes. And to me, health and quality of life and air smell is something to go to bat for, along with health care, child development, and all the other things you guys talked about. And thank you for all your comments. Those were very educational. This is a topic that is not getting attention in our media very much. And I invite anybody to read the air quality permit. It's 1,200 pages.
I think we'll move on to another topic. So, Mike, did you have a question on a different topic?
Actually, it's the same.
Okay, then I think we'll save that for after, if you want to have a private conversation or just a comment. We'll let you have a comment, but we have to move on. You want to comment?
Sure.
Not a question, but a comment.
Well, as you said respectfully, my name's Mike Kendall, and I would suggest, I didn't mean this as a comment, I was going to ask you a question, but the implication of the question was that you do have oversight authority over the conduct of all administrative agencies in state government that you fund. That's one way you have oversight over them. You pay the bills through taxpayer dollars. Secondly, in 1979, the Republican Senate created a study committee to look into the operations of a proposed nuclear power plant down here, which on the surface was solely in the hands of the federal government. And in the course of investigating it, it turned out there were state nexuses with it. So I think that the oversight issue that the Environmental Committee or the Public Policy Committee could look at in terms of taking a look into what's going on here before the session ends is whether or not IDEM is actually carrying out the roles that they have under the state statutes and the regulations they promulgated under the state statutes governing siting of such a facility. And those include the fact that the technology that's going to be used has only been used twice in the world since World War II, once in China, once in Poland, and both those plants have been shut down. Secondly, the investors that are proposing to do this have never built a refinery like this before, and so they have no experience doing it, and IDEM has not asked them to commit to hiring a general contractor with experience in doing it, because they would have to consult with China or Poland to do it, who shut it down there for environmental reasons. And then last but not least, the company is proposing to discharge the wastewater from the plant 7 miles north into the Huntingburg Draking Reservoir, or Huntingburg Lake. And that lake is already not adequate enough so that Huntingburg has a contract with Patoka Lake and Jasper to provide supplemental water. So I think all of those things, because you pay the bills for the IDEM's oversight of this, would be of concern enough to either use the committee's existing powers or a special study committee to look into the siting of the facility. When Marble Hill went off the tracks, it went off the tracks because PSI had never built a nuclear power plant. So they didn't know how to do it. They'd only built coal. They didn't hire a nuclear power plant contractor like Babcock Wilcox to do it. And then what really closed them down was that they and the building trades unions cut a deal, and they got all the core cooling equipment tested in Mexico by uncertified people and not tested, shipped back across the border and stamped and brought in. And it was that cost overrun which eventually did them in. So I think, you know, you have within your authority to look at what IDEM's doing in an investigatory way, either to draft legislation to fix it if you think you don't have the authority, or whether or not you actually do. And I think that those are issues. Last but not least, one of you is on transportation or roads, and the proposed route for the hauling of the diesel fuel is going to be right through Huntingburg and Jasper and Ferdinand and Jasper. And that is an issue to look at, because if you start having fuel trucks that size carrying that, you're like having, you know, whole bombs of jet plane fuel moving north through urban areas. There's been situations out west with other plants where they're turning stuff into diesel, where they've blown up inside towns admittedly smaller than these, of 200-400, and wiped the town out. So it's really, really not something I think that isn't in your purview.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for your comments. Any other questions? Liz?
Thanks, Nancy. Hello, everyone. Liz Irwin with Smithville Communications. I just have a really kind of general overview question. I know there's been a lot of changes. I think there's maybe 19 new members of the House and 5 new senators, some changes in leadership. I just wondered if you would perhaps give kind of a broad overview of how you think those changes are going to affect the session and what we can all be looking out for as the session unfolds.
Well, on the Senate side, our new Senate senators that got elected this session, you know, come from a broad range of backgrounds and experiences. It's not abnormal. I think 4 years ago when we came in, was there eight new senators that year. 2 years ago there was, you know, probably another half a dozen. In 6 years we've probably had, I think, 26, or at least in 8 years, 26 new Senate members. And that turnover, 15 to 20 new House members every election cycle, is pretty typical. I think that fresh blood brings in fresh ideas. You know, we've got a new leadership team on the Senate side. Gives you a good opportunity to you know, look at things, you know, from a new direction. And I'd expect, you know, probably, you know, in the next cycle or two, you'll probably see, you know, the similar leadership changes on the House side. So I mean, with that is, I think our benches are deep in both, you know, the House and the Senate, and when opportunities arise, it's good to see people step up and you know, take new leadership roles. So should be a good session, I think.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience? No? All right. Well, I would like to thank everyone for being here today. I'd like to thank our state legislators, and because they are citizen legislators, we'll just thank you to Steve, Shane, Mark, and Aaron for being here today. And again, we will have 2 legislative sessions, one in January. I think we picked January 26th, and the other one would be March the 2nd. And then at that point in time, you'll know more about some laws that are moving forward and things like that. So we'll catch up later and let you know all about that. And thank you, and Merry Christmas to everyone.